Okay, good tavach everyone, and a wonderful welcome. Join us for another beautiful week of Daf Yomi of Learning Torah, sponsored by A.B. Spry. Sponsored by A.B. Spry for nachas from children and grandchildren. Sponsored by Yaakov Yamansky with Akar Satov to the Rav and the Zoom family and nachas from children and grandchildren. Sponsored by Shalom Fogel, Nishmas Yaakov Zeb ben Yudai, Rivka Bas Yaakov Yosef, Tzivya Miriam Bas Gad, Yosef ben Siyam ben Yaakov Zeb, by Baruch Ian, Lili Nishmas Yaakov Chaim ben Abba, Esther Bas Gittel, Abraham ben Shmuel HaKohen, by Ed Salah from London, and Joshua Rosenberg, a virtual Talmud. And we are holding, by Tojma, 2 lines from the bottom of Daf Pei Vava Midbeis, 2 lines from the bottom of Daf Pei Vava Midbeis, as we welcome in Saba, we welcome in Mel Zachter, Aaron Swade, Irving Fishbaum, Marshall Castle, Nachman Chapler, A.B. Spry, Rabbi Kranz, Dr. Black, Michal, Mo Kushner, Moshe Lehman, Abe Arbach, Ilya Shutman, Yitzi Muller, Chaim Braun, Shelley Zeitlin. We welcome here in the shul, we have Berish Gesseman and Ruvain Shanit holding the fort here so far this evening in a shul that is a little hotter than usual. It's not so hot outside now, so it's not that bad, but it is a little hotter than usual as we had to shut off the vents. David Helfgott has just joined us on Kol HaLashon and the Good Tavach. So, Tojma, a little bit of a intricate ribbis piece of Gemara here. So, what happens is, Hasoicher es hapoyel, lasois imai, L'geirein hayayim. If, let's say, Marshall hires Shelley to do work for him in his granary, and he makes up with him hayayim b'dinner. He makes up for him a dinner a day. Now, they're not holding yet by the threshing season. And what he does is he pays Shelley in advance. Now you have to understand that if Marshall is paying someone in advance, Marshall, you're lucky if he pays you on time. But if Marshall is paying in advance, there's a reason for it. It's because by the time the threshing season comes, it's going to be more expensive. So he's paying him in advance to get cheaper labor. That's. One second, what's going on over here? That's Marshall at his best. So again, he pays him in advance to work in the threshing season, a dinner per day. Now, ulegayrin, during the time of the threshing season, yafasela, the wage would be a seller, which is 4 times as much. So basically, why is Shelley giving him this discount? Why is Shelley giving him this discount? Because Marshall advanced him the money. And since Marshall advanced him the money, Shelley, for having the money, is paying him with cheaper labor for getting the money in advance, which basically is he's paying him ribbas on the loan. So the din is also lehanois heimenu. It's forbidden for Marshall to benefit that way. In other words, he's getting it for a quarter of the price, and therefore Shelley only has to work for him a quarter of the day. And Marshall knew that's what he was getting himself into.
So, but if you work,
1 second. Aval im scharai mehayim, if, however, he hired him and Shelley started working for him already before the threshing season. So again, aval im scharai mehayim, if he hired him and he started working him for right away, b'dinner l'yayim, then even though v'lagayrin yafasela, even though at the threshing season it's worth a seller and he's getting a discount, instead of paying him for dinner, he's paying him a dinner, that's mutter. Because there, he didn't advance him money. He paid him from the get-go. He was working right away. Now, but the problem is, if remember we said, the isal kedaita kurbish loishim sab selani meichalach. If we say that, if I say to someone, I'm selling you a curve for 30 sa, and I say, kurbish loishim sab besela ani meichalach. If I say that I'm selling you a kur of 30 sa, and for 30, and then I reiterate sa b'sela, each sa for a sela, ani meichalach, then rishon kana, then it stops right away. You know, it's the each time I give you a sa, you acquire it because I said the double lashon, right? I'm selling you each sa as a separate deal. So hachanami, in this case, kama mifsik pasik. I hired Shelley, and I said I'm paying him a dinner for a yain. So then each day is over. And if I advanced him the money, since each day is considered a separate deal, and I advanced him the money, so again it should be v'asa lehanas mimenu. Even in the second case, it should be forbidden for Marshall to benefit because he's getting a discounted rate from Shelley because he advanced him the money. It's not one deal. Then a dinner l'yayim, if he made up for him a dinner per day, v'lagarin yafasela, mutter. Why would it be mutter? Amai v'agar noter lihu. The fact is that he advanced all the money to Shelley in the beginning, and therefore he's getting a reward for the fact that he's getting a reward for the fact that Marshall had to wait for the work till later, and that's why he's giving him a reward of a discounted price. Says the Gemara, I'm a Rav of a Tizbara, zilzule beschiris miyaser. Why can't you give somebody a cheaper rate? Why? Not everybody gets paid the same rate. You can't give a person a cheaper wage. So the Gemara says, well, if you could give a person a cheaper wage, then in the first case too, where he pays Shelley in advance, and he doesn't work with him until he does the threshing, Maishna Reisha, Maishna Seifa. What's the difference between the Reisha and the Seifa? Says the Gemara, Reisha, Deloika Ofi Bahadei Mehashta. In the Reisha, where Shelley doesn't work for him right away. So there it's clear that the reason why he's getting the discount is because he advanced him the money. Mirzeki Agar Notterly. He's giving him the discount for the fact that Marshall is waiting for the service. In other words, he paid him ahead, and because Marshall is waiting for the service until the Gairin, so that's why he's getting the discount. That's interest. Seifa, in the Seifa where Shelley started working immediately, the Ka'avid Ba'adei Hashta, he started working immediately, that's like Mirzeh Ki Agar Notali. That doesn't look like he's paying for him to wait. Now, the Mishnah says, if the flax is attached to the ground, v'tolish kolshu, and he pulls out some of the flax, kana. He acquires all of it. So the Gemara doesn't understand what's the mechanics of this. Mishum de tolish kolshu kana, because he pulls out some of the flax, he acquires all of the flax? Says the Gemara, no. Remember, Marshall is selling to Shelley a piece of land with flax attached. And remember, if you buy a piece of land, you could become it by making an improvement on a small amount of it. Even Rafik Bapursa, even if you dig a little bit, you acquire the whole piece of land. So Amar Rav Sheish Tzacham in the Amalei Leich Yafa Karka Kolshu. Go improve some of the land by pulling out some of the flax. And therefore acquire the land and all that which is attached to it, which he could do, because that's making a chazaka on the land. Okay, welcome, as we welcome in Chaim Braun, Moshe. We welcome in Avram Sheps. So, new Mishnah. Hamoicha yayin b'shemen l'chaveiroi. If, let's say, I sell wine or oil to Dr. Black, the hukru, it goes up in price, or shehuzli, or goes down in price. Im she'acheloi nismale hamida, if the measuring vessel didn't fill up yet, l'moicher, I could back out. Mishinismale hamida, once it filled up, then it belongs to the buyer, and I can't back out. If there was a middleman between us, so nishbra achavyas, if the measuring vessel broke while it was being measured out by the middleman, nishbra l'sirsa, the middleman takes the loss. Now, when you are being sold, when I sell you a sticky liquid like oil, so I turn the keli upside down and let it pour into your vessel, and after it finishes, then v'chayev lahatif lo shalosh tipin. I have to let it drip 3 more drops after the flow stopped. Then hirkina, then after the 3 drops, if I put it back erect and umitzas, and still something collected on the bottom of the vessel, I don't have to give that collection to you. How are you shomoicher? Once I let it drip 3 drips, the rest that collects on the bottom is mine. V'achenveni, a grocer, who's very busy. Since he's very busy, eina chayiv lahativ shalosh tipin. he's not required to let it drip the 3 drips. Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, Erev Shabbos im Chashecha Potter. If it's Erev Shabbos, near nightfall Potter, the Gemara is going to say that Rabbi Yehuda is going on the first case. If it's Erev Shabbos, even a regular seller, not a grocer, because it's right before Shabbos, he doesn't have to let it drip the 3 drips. Now remember when we said that if I was selling to Dr. Block, before the measuring vessel gets filled up, I could back out. After it gets full, it belongs to Dr. Block. So the question is, whose measuring vessel? If it's Dr. Block's vessel, then even before it fills up, whatever goes in there should be Dr. Block's. Before it fills up, it still belongs to me. Why? It's Dr. Block's vessel. It's my vessel. If it's my vessel, even when it fills up, unless Dr. Block's makes a kinyan, why should it be his? Says the Gemara, even if it fills up, why? It shouldn't be Dr. Block's. It's mine, and it should remain mine until he makes Mashiach or he makes Agva. Amar Rabbi La, b'mida sirser. It's talking about where we're using the measuring vessel of a third party, of a middleman. So until it fills up, the middleman gives it to the seller. Once it fills up, he gives it to Dr. Block. Says Gemara, but we learned, if the middleman is between them, nishbra achavius nishbra l'sirser, it's considered that the responsibility is the middleman. That means that the Reish is not talking about a middleman. The Reish l'abasir is asking. Says, no, it depends if the middleman is there or not. If the middleman is not there, so he lends it to the seller until it's full and then gives it to the buyer. If he's there, however, it's in his possession until he pours it into the buyer's keli. Reish amida b'loy sirsa. Reish is where the middleman lent out the measuring vessel. He's not there. Sefer b'sirsa atzmai, where the middleman is there. As we have the pleasure of welcoming in Avram Schenkman. It's great to have you, Avram. As we are holding on 87a, Pei Zayin Amar Aleph, 5 lines from the bottom. 5 lines from the bottom. Now, the Mishnah says here, Kino umitzis, after letting the 3 drops come out, if then you put it back erect and something collects on the bottom, Ariyu shel Meicher. Says the Gemara, Ki Solik Rebbe Elazar, when Rebbe Elazar went up to Eretz Yisrael, Solik means to go up, and since Eretz Yisrael is Gevaya Mikol Haratzos, it means going up to Eretz Yisrael, going up from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. Kisalik Rebbe Elazar Ashkechei leZeiri, he found Zeiri. Amalei mikan tona de asniye Rav midas. Is there anybody over here that Rav taught the Mishnah of the measuring vessels? So Achvei Rav Yitzchak Rav Dimi, they showed him Rav Yitzchak Rav Dimi. Amalei, so Rav Yitzchak Rav Dimi asked Rebbe Elazar, Maika Kashala, what do you want to know? What do you find difficult? So he says, I'll tell you what my difficulty is. The Tanan, here Kino mitzvahs, if he puts it back on its base and something collects on the bottom after the 3 drops. Hariyu shel Meicher. Votanan, we learned that if somebody separates the contents of a vessel and says it's truma, it says over there that after letting the 3 drops go down to the koyin, here kino umitzis, if you put it back on the base, arizu truma, what collects on the bottom is still truma. Says the Gemara, Amaleha Itmar Allah Amar Rabbi Yavo Mishum Yush Bailim Naguba. In the case of where it's the seller, once the seller lets the 3 drops come out, anything else the buyer is miyayishan. And therefore it reverts back to the seller. But if the contents of a keli is declared truma, even if after letting the 3 drops out, the kohen that he's giving it to is miyayish, so what? The whole contents of the keli is truma, and it can't be had by a non-kohen. Now the Mishnah says, because a grocer is busy, he doesn't have to let the 3 drops come out. Rabbi Yehuda says, Erev Shabbos, you don't have to let the 3 drops. Now it's ambiguous. It's not clear. Is Rabbi Yehuda saying that even a grocer, that's only on Erev Shabbos? Or is he being more makel and saying a regular person who has to let the 3 drops on Erev Shabbos doesn't? So, Ibayelu, Rabbi Yehuda Reishakai, Ulakula, that even a regular person that has to let the 3 drops come out, it's on Erev Shabbos he doesn't. Oidilma Seifakai, that which you say that a Chenvini doesn't, he's going Lechumra, and he says even a Chenvini doesn't, only on Erev Shabbos. So, Tajma, the Gemara will prove this categorically, as we welcome in Richard Rosenzweig joining us. Tajma, the Tanya, for we learned in the Braisa, Rabbi Yehuda Aimer Erev Shabbos Im Chashecha, Friday, before nightfall, Chenvini Potter. The Chenvini, the grocer, is Potter, Mipnei Shechenvini Torah. So Rabbi Yehuda is Machmir, that it's only the only time the grocer is Potter is only Erev Shabbos, not any other time. Okay, now we start the next Mishnah as we go to Pei Zayin Amud Beis, and it's really wonderful to have everybody with us starting the week this way, and since it's in Elul, less than 15 days before Rosh Hashanah Yom Adin, this is very, very good use of time. It always is. But especially now, it's very good use of time. Remember, we want to give Hashem a reason why He should give us a good new year. And the best thing is to say, Rabban Shem, you know what I want to do in my time? This is what I want to do with my time. This is what you created the world for. This is the reason you created the world. So we learn to be Mekayim the mitzvah of a dibar tabam lasa isnachas ruach liyotzreinu. Says the Mishnah, Hashaleach es benoi eitzel chenveni. Here, this is an interesting case. Berish sends his young boy, a child. He sends his child to Marshall, the grocer. Marshall the grocer, and I've children with Marshall. Okay.
Give them free candy when they come in.
Okay. Shaleach has been. Mother says, "Why do you have a stomach ache?" Well, Marshall gave me 16 frankfurters. And why do you have a smell in your mouth? He said bourbon is good for me. Yeah, so anyway. Be careful when you send your children to Marshall. They'll never be the same. So, you should see over here, Reuven Shannon is snickering. He's never had the experience of sending his child to you, Marshall. If he did. Anyway, so, yeah, right. Now, so Asheleach es benoi eitzel chenveni. Berish, brave man, sends his son to Marshall the grocer, upundyoi biyodai. And the child has a punyan. A punyan is 2 iser. He has a punyan in his hand. Umodad loi be'iser shemen. So Marshall measures out to him an iser shemen. Now, if he only measures him out in Isser Shemen, so he has to give him change, because the child was carrying a punyan, and Marshall gives him change. V'nosan lo yesa Isser. Now, little child Gesserman is, he's a child. So Shavar Esat Sluchas, he broke the flask, all the oil poured out, the Iber Esa Isser, and he lost the Isser change. Chen v'nei chayev. Marshal is chayev, because what kind of responsible act is it to give it to a child? Right? Rabbi Yehuda Paiter. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, Marshal is exempt. Shalmanas Kain Sholchai. What do you think? The Barish sent him that he should give it to the child. He's only doing the will of the father. Right? So, Shalmanas Kain Sholchai. Umaydim Chachamim Rabbi Yehuda, the Chachamim that say Barish is Chayiv, the Chachamim admit to Rabbi Yehuda Bisman Shat Sluchas Biyad Atinik, if the child was carrying the vessel, Umadad Chen V'ni L'Seicha, and Marshall measured it into the vessel that Barish gave the child, and he broke the vessel, Shechen V'ni Potter. They agree that the Chen V'ni is Potter for the vessel, even though he's not Potter for the oil and the change. Now, what's going on over here? This is, again, a real ambiguous case. The only thing we know is that Marshall is trouble. That's the only thing we know. But everything else, we're not sure over here. So says the Gemara, obviously what it looks like is the question is, when Barish sent the child, was he just informing Marshall that he needs the oil, but he didn't want Marshall to give the child the change and give him the oil? And then Marshall will be chayiv, because he was only meant to deliver it to the house. Or was he telling him to give it to him? And then he was freeing Marshall of the responsibility. So let's see this inside. Bishleima be'isa b'shem and ba'apligi. The Rabbanim savrei la'odue shadrei. He only sent the child to inform Marshall that he wants delivery. While Rabbi Yehuda savra l'shturei shadrei. That Shelley, Barish, wants him to send her with the child. And then, according to, therefore, Rabbi Yehuda, Barish is exempting him from responsibility. Ela shavart sluchis, but the fact that the flask breaks, how can we be Mechayev Marshall for that? Aveda Medasi. Barish gave the child a flask, a little child that can't take care of it. It's Barish's fault. What would be the svara that Marshall should be responsible?
Didn't we say everybody agrees in that case?
Huh? No, then there's a second case. Right? But in the first case, everybody agrees there's a machlokes about liability. Right? There's a second case. But what's the original case? So let's see. That's what the Gemara is going to set up. Amar Rav Hoshia, Hacha b'balabayis meicher tzluchas askina. Here we're talking about where Barish sells flasks. So Barish sells flasks, and what happened is that Marshall took it al manas levakra. Barish was selling flasks. He sent the flask with the child. Marshall picked it up to inspect it. And once he picks it up to inspect it, he becomes responsible for it. Ukadishmul, Dama Shmuel anoitel keli min ha'uman, if you took a keli from a craftsman, almanas levakroi, and then v'nenas biyadai, and even an accident happened, chayiv. So the Gemara says, so then what's the machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim? Lema de Shmuel Tanoyi, you mean that Shmuel's dictum, whether Marshall becomes responsible because he inspected it, is a machlokes between the Chacham and Rabbi Yehuda? Nobody, Shmuel's dictum seems to be a universal dictum. Ella, Rabbi Yosef Dimrei Travayu Hachabit Chenveni Meicher Tzluchi Askinan. Here we're talking about in the first case, not in the second case, which I told Rabbi Kranz. In the first case, we're talking about where Marshall also sells flasks. And again, the machlokes is whether Berish told him to deliver it or to give it to the child. Says Gemara, Ihachi, if so, Ema Seifa, Moidim Chachamim Rabbi Yehuda, the Chachamim agree with Rabbi Yehuda, Bizman Shat Sluchas Biyad Atinik, when the flask is in the hands of the child, Umodad Chenveni L'Seicha, and Marshall measures it into the flask, Shechenveni Potter. Now, the Gemara doesn't make the deduction that in this case it's talking about where the child came with the flask. It still assumes that it's talking about that the marshal gives the child the flask because he sells the flasks. And we say that here, even the Chachamim are Maida, but why? The Amrit Loi Duei Shadrei. We said that Chachamim hold that he only sent him to deliver it later on. So why would the Chachamim admit in this case that Marshall is exempt? Says the Gemara, El Abaya bar Avin, V'Rab Chanina bar Avin de Imrei Travayu. They both say, Hacha b'may askinan, you know what we're talking about here? Kigayin shenot la lamud ba. It's talking about again where the child had the flask. And Marshall took the flask in order to measure the oil with it. So what was Marshall then? Marshall was a shoyel shaloi midas. He borrowed it without, I'm getting ahead of myself. He took it in order to measure with it. The Kedarabba, and it's going like Rabbah. The Amar Rabbah, the din is that we know that if an old man sees a lost article that wouldn't be dignified for him to take, so for example, he finds a neon hula hoop in the street, and it would look funny for him to walk in the street with a neon hula hoop. We learn out from the pasuk v'salamta mehem that pa'omim she'ata yuchal l'saleh, that you could hide yourself and not pick it up. Now, likewise, an old man, it wouldn't be fitting for him to walk with an animal, so he doesn't have to pick up the animal. But the din is hikisha. If he hits the animal in order to get it moving, once he does that, then nischayaba, he's already obligated to return it. So here too, once Marshall takes the vessel to measure the oil, he becomes obligated in it. So the Gemara says, I don't like the comparison. I know we have to turn the channel soon, but I don't want to stop in the middle of a thought. Ema da Amar Rabbah. Where does Rabbah say that the old man becomes responsible? That's b'balei chayim. Because when he hits the animal, he might be causing it to go further away from the owner. The ankintu nigra bayasa. He causes it to make exterior steps. He causes it possibly to move more away from the owner, and therefore he becomes responsible. But ki hai gavna miyamar, did he say it in this case? Where he measures and gives it back, he didn't do anything detrimental with the item. And now we're going to pause a moment to turn over the channel.